Well, let me say good morning to everyone. It is a joy to welcome you to our first service of our gospel meeting with Brother Ed Brand as our guest speaker. His good wife, Sister Pat, is with us as well, and the Lord willing will be with us throughout the week as the meeting continues through Wednesday. As we lead into this first service, we're just going to have a word of prayer, and then we're going to turn the time over to Brother Brand. Because we have fellowship with Brother Brand in the preaching of the gospel and in the good work that he does, we have asked that for this first period, which is the class period, that he update us in addition to the good reports he sends out via email. We've asked that for this period he talk to us about the work that's going on in some of the places. Doors have been opened for evangelism for him. And so he'll be doing that this first period this morning, and then looking at portraits of Jesus as the meeting continues. For this period, as we ordinarily do here at Hanceville with our gospel meetings, the two youngest classes will meet. We'll go ahead and have class, but all the other classes will remain here in the auditorium. So Brother Brand, you'll have everyone except the youngest two classes for your first period. I've asked Thomas Poe to lead us in this prayer to get our first session underway. Thomas, if you would, lead us as we bow with you. But also among those who are not Christians. And it's very easy to think that most of the Christians reside in America, but that is a false impression, because there are brethren all over the world. And in the second most populous country in the world, which is India, there probably are more Christians there than any other place in the world. Now, that's just my assessment. I have no concrete figures to back that up. But from what I see and what I hear, I think it's accurate. This morning, I would like to talk a little bit about some places where I've been this year. And this is, for those who are geographically challenged, which I have been geographically challenged, we're going to basically be discussing things that take place in this part of the world, and in this part of the world, and in Central Europe. Now, there are other places where I've been, but not in this year. And so we're going to concentrate on these places, and you're going to meet some people that in many ways do not look like you. Their skin may be a different color, their clothing is different, their language is different, even their singing is different. But they've done the very same things that you have done to become a Christian. And so the first place we want to go is to the country of Indonesia. Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world. It has a population of about 210 million people. And almost in every place that you go, you will find evidences of Islam, with one exception, and this is a very surprising exception, and that is going to be on the island of Bali, which we will eventually go there, but not at the very beginning. Now, this trip took place in January of this year, and we're going to go to a place that, let me back this one up, and there is a town called Bandung, which is right here. It is the second largest city on the island of Java. Now, Java, I guess maybe this is one reason why your coffee used to be called Java, is because much of the coffee comes from there. But our purpose in going there obviously is not for coffee, but it's to meet a man and some other people. The man is named Robert Sanusi. I met Robert more than 35 years ago, and it was almost accidentally. Robert had come to the United States, to the University of Kentucky, to take some continuing education. While he was in the U.S., he came in contact with Christians, and he became a Christian. He went back home to Bandung, where he was a government employee, and eventually his wife and his two sons were converted, and they met in their home. And that's when I first began to work with Robert. But over the years, our contacts sort of got rusty. We didn't talk to each other very much. But somehow or other, a few years ago, I was able to locate Robert again. He had become an adjunct professor at a university in Bandung. He taught economics. And I went to see Robert again, and we sort of reestablished our friendship. Much has changed. Robert has gone back to the Presbyterian Church in the meantime, but he still expresses an interest in studying the Bible. On this trip, my main purpose was going to work with a family that lives in a little place called Cianjur, which is right here. Now, on the map, it looks very, very close. It's only about 35 kilometers away, which is less than 20 miles. But it takes about 2.5 hours to get there. And the reason is, number one, the roads are not good, and what roads they have are very congested. So we're going to go to Cianjur and meet with a family who have relations on the island of Bali. This young lady's name is Mylisa. Now, I know you can't see her because she just came up out of the water. But she was baptized on, I think, a Saturday afternoon. We had studied with her and with her family. Her sister is already a Christian. Her sister lives in Bali.
And as we were walking around just sort of looking to see the sights, we came near a swimming pool, and she asked basically the same question the eunuch asked: what does hinder me to be baptized? And we said, nothing. Are you ready? Well, she wasn't. She had no change of clothes, but we took care of that, and very soon after that, we made our way down to a swimming club, and this is where she is immersed. Now, obviously, whoops, let me back up. Obviously, it seems to be raining because this man who's holding the umbrella is named Peter Joshua. I met Peter maybe 5 or 6 years ago in Singapore. Peter is a Christian. He is the one who helped facilitate these trips. So Peter is holding the umbrella, hopefully over me, not over her, because she is going to be immersed in this pool. She is a single mother. She did what so many young women and young men do. They lost their discretion. She became pregnant, and she had a child, and then the young man that she was going to marry decided he wanted nothing to do with her, and so they never married. So she is a young woman with a child, but now she has become a Christian. She has another sister named Rhea who also lives here, and so the two of them met together. Unfortunately, I don't think they are still meeting together. It's very difficult. Imagine that you're in a town of, say, 100,000 people, and there are only 2 Christians there. And most all of the other inhabitants are Muslims. What would you do? Well, you'd say, I know what I would do. I would meet every Sunday and I'd study the Bible. Well, that's probably a normal reaction. But in reality, that's very difficult to do. As far as I know, Rhea is still trying to maintain her identity as a Christian, and you sometimes have to do things that are unconventional, especially when you're alone. And so every Sunday she is able to Skype with the small church in Bali, and she is able to listen to a lesson and to sort of vicariously participate. I recognize the Bible does not even envision something like this. It's certainly abnormal. But I raised the question, if you were alone, what would you do? Well, I think you would do everything you could to sustain your faith and to be able to maintain some kind of contact with those others who are Christians. Sir? You know, it is not. So I guess I'm being unrecorded. If I can figure out which way to turn this thing. Well, that's easier said than done. Okay. Now it is on. So, Melissa is baptized, and from there, we are going to go to Bali. And the small church in Bali is basically composed of 3 people. It started out with 2, Peter and Marlene. And then Peter's brother, named Marco, became a Christian. Well, while we are in Cianjur teaching there, Marco has contracted dengue fever and is in the hospital. And so when we go to Bali and stay with Peter for a few days and we study together, we're able to meet in the hospital room on Sunday afternoon with Marco. Now, you may be thinking, well, but you know, that's not a church. Well, yes, it is. All 3 of us were there. All 3 of the members were there. Marco just happened to be hospitalized. But Marlene and Peter were both there. We sang, we prayed, and we had a lesson, and we took the supper together. Now, you may be thinking that's certainly not the norm that we would think about what happens on Sunday morning. Well, it's not here. But it is the norm in a number of places in the world where Christians are few and where their circumstances are far different from ours. Most every place where I go, where the Christians meet, is not in a church building. Very few churches own buildings. Some of them meet in very crude huts. Some of them meet under trees. Some of them meet in a hotel room. Or in this case, some of them meet in a hospital room. So what we often think about church is what we see in America, but in other parts of the world, you see a far different thing. And I think, in many respects, what you see in other parts of the world is more like what you see in the New Testament than what you see in America. Now, that's not to say that what you see in America is wrong. It's simply saying that I have formed a mental picture of what a church looks like. But in many parts of the world, that picture is highly inaccurate. Now, the next place we're going to go is to this country here. Today it's called Myanmar, but for years it was called Burma. And Burma is an interesting country from a number of respects, but mainly because it is basically a Buddhist country. You can hardly go anywhere without seeing a Buddhist pagoda. But there are some Christians there. And we're going to go to a part of the country which is called the Chin State, which is right up through here, which just so happens to be just across the border from India. And the man we're going to meet is named Benjamin, whom I met several years ago. This would have been my fourth trip to Burma. There is a small church that meets in the place where he works. He happens to run a school. The school is basically composed of orphans as well as children whose parents will send them to an English medium school. And so there's a small church that meets there. There's another church that meets in the town, and the town is called Calais. But this will take place in the month of March. Now, this is a real bridge. Would you ride across that on a motorcycle? I didn't. I got there on the back end of a motorcycle. Benjamin has a motorcycle, and that's the way many of the Burmese people get around. And I rode for an hour and a half on the back end of the motorcycle until we came to this bridge. And I said, Benjamin, I think I'm going to get off, and I'm going to walk across this bridge. Now, you can ride across it if you want. Now, this looks like a pretty dilapidated bridge, but it's not. It's fairly sturdy. It's used every day, and all kinds of traffic go across that bridge. This part of Burma happens to be in sort of an area where it is susceptible to great floods, particularly in the spring when there's a snowmelt. And this little bridge goes across a creek that is, at the very present time, is very small. But during the flood season, it will be over the banks, and this bridge will more than likely be underwater. But we're going to a place where we have a Bible study scheduled. This is a normal Burmese house. It is made out of this type of timber, which happens to be teak. In America, it's very expensive, but teak in Burma is very, very common. It's everywhere. And you even see people cooking with teak. But in this house, you'll see that here there are lots of young people, boys and girls. This is Benjamin. And he's going to be helping in the translation, but this young man is actually going to be translating from English actually it's interpreting, not translating. He's interpreting from English into the Chin language. Now, if you added one letter to Chin, you would come up with the derivation of where these people come from, and that is China. There are a number of different nationalities that compose the Burmese nation, and there are a lot of different languages which are spoken there. But most of these people are Buddhist. Some of them are denominational people. And generally, the way that this is done is that in the morning we will get up in Calais and eat breakfast, and then we'll get either on Benjamin's motorcycle, or we'll rent a vehicle and take off, and usually the distance traveled is between an hour and an hour and a half one way. It is warm there during this time of year, and these people, as you can see, there is some electricity, but there's no fan there, and it will get very, very hot. This study will take place in the morning. At noontime, there will be some kind of a meal provided. And if you don't like rice, don't ever go to Burma, because they, like the Indians, eat rice every day. And so there's a meal provided, and then in the afternoon there'll be another 2 to 3 hour session, and then we will retreat back to the hotel. Now the hotel does have air conditioning, fortunately, and I think these studies lasted for about 4 days. This is the afternoon study. From Burma, we're going to go to India, and this part of India is eastern India, and we're going to be in this state, in this state, and in this state. The population of India is approximately 1.2 billion people. That's what, almost four times the population of the United States. The physical country of India is smaller than the U.S. And so in the large cities, people are really crammed together. We're going to start out in this state, which is called Bihar State, and we're going to a town that's called Purnia. Now, Purnia is in the state of Bihar, and the two states that we're going to that we'll visit in the first part are very, very poor. It is almost indescribable, because you smell things there you don't smell in America. You see things there you don't see in America. But there are people who are still looking for truth. And when you bring a Bible with you and you're able to sit down and talk about the Bible, then you'll find people who are interested to listen. Now, I want especially the young people and the ladies to look at this stove. Actually, there are two stoves here. And these stoves have 3 burners. Now this stove is outside. It has no shelter. This is a common kitchen in India. There are some kitchens that are inside the house, but not very many. And one of the reasons why this is so is because of the fuel that they use for these stoves. It is often wood, and you know wood smokes, and when you get smoke in the house, it's not really very pleasant. So much of the cooking takes place outside. Now that brings up a problem of when it rains, what do? Well, they don't cook. So when you ladies begin to complain about your electric range is not working quite right, just think about these ladies. It just so happens that the man is here cooking, and guess what he's cooking? He is cooking rice, along with some other things. But these are very common vessels, very common pots, which they use to cook with. And we're having a Bible study. We've already had a study in the morning, and we will then have a study in the afternoon, and then we will go back to where we are staying in the evening. And this is a very common practice. That is, you may have studies in one village for maybe 2 days, and then you go to another village. And there are many, many, many villages in the state of Bihar. Now, I do want to show you, this is a common village scene. Can you tell what that stuff is on those stakes? Well, I'll give you a clue. Sometimes it is used for fuel. Sometimes it is used for kind of like a plaster. It's cow dung. It is everywhere. It smells. You cannot get rid of the smell. And obviously there are many cows, many cattle in this part of Bihar. But this is everywhere. You see it dumped along the side of the road. And what they're doing here is they put them on, now it looks like a kebab, doesn't it? But I don't think you'd want to put that on the fire. But you can see this is what it's made out of. And what this does is to dry it out. And they will often use this for fuel. I have seen houses plastered with this. Obviously, you do a little whitewash over it. But this is a very, very common scene in this part of the world. It is unsanitary. I suspect that if I had to live there, I would have to wear a plastic suit of some kind to sort of guard against all of the contaminants which are everywhere. In the rainy season in particular, this becomes a real problem because even many of the Indians get sick. Well, I got sick there. I had a very common disease. I had diarrhea. It's sometimes called Travelers or Montezuma's Revenge. And the man that I was staying with, whose name is Masa Tudu, I said, I need to get some medication. He said, I can get you something, and tomorrow you will be well. I said, well, if you get that medication, you get me a double batch, because I'm going to take some precautions. I'm going to take that medication with me. I didn't believe him. Well, I do believe him now, because he gave me the medication, and by the next day, I was fine, at least as fine as I was going to be. We are in the state of Odisha, or Orissa, which is 2 states below where we were in Purnia. And this man's name is Kamudu Lima. His brother's name is also Lema. That's what I usually call him. And I met him a year ago when I was in the little town of Vizianagaram, which is in the next state below, which is Andhra Pradesh. And these men have been basically acquainted with hardly any Americans. They learned the truth several years ago, and each of them began teaching. Now, they are a little different from at least a personality standpoint for me. I have no personality, and they've got too much. And sometimes it gets kind of pushy and kind of tense, but they have arranged a number of studies, and this is one of them. We were meeting in a hotel room in a rather small village, and there are about 40 preachers there. Now, not everybody there is a preacher, but most all of them are. They do not speak English, and so the subject that we're going to be teaching will have to be interpreted. Now, you may think, well, you know, isn't that kind of slow? Well, yes, it is. But if you have a good interpreter, it really helps to move things along more quickly. And you may think, well, finding a good interpreter, that shouldn't be too hard. Well, that's not necessarily true. Because whether you realize it or not, the Bible has some very technical language that we do not use those words in ordinary speech, like propitiation and atonement. These are not words that we use every day. And so you need to have someone who has a basic understanding of the Bible, who is able to know what those words mean so that they can accurately interpret what you're saying. And so these studies take place they're about 2.5 hours in the morning and 2.5 hours in the afternoon. And again, I suggest this is a very, very poor state. When I say poor, I mean the poverty level there is almost unimaginable. I've seen places where some of our brethren live there, and it's hard to describe how in the world they live the way that they do. Some of them live in cardboard huts, or huts made out of thatch, no running water, no toilet in the hut. And so you are exposed to things that perhaps in our country 120 years ago, that would not be all that unusual. But in today's society, where we live in houses that you can control the temperature, you can control the heat of the water, you can control almost everything that comes in your house, that it is very eye-opening to see that most of the world does not live this way. Most of the world lives in what we would describe as abject circumstances. And many of our brethren live this way, but I must say that I did not encounter a great deal of unhappiness. Their lot is hard, that is true, but that's all they've ever known. And one of the great mistakes, I think, that's sometimes made is that when a man becomes a preacher, say in India or in Burma, that, well, I'd like to go to the U.S. and study. And that's a noble idea, to study to increase your knowledge. But when someone from what we would call a third world country comes to America and they see the opulence in which we live, you think they'd ever want to go back home? More than likely not. Well, this now is in the town or the city of Vizianagaram. The preacher's name there is Samson, and I've known Samson for a couple of years. And it was through Chuck Richardson that I met Samson. I accompanied Chuck there a couple of years ago, and I've been back twice since then. This is one of the few self-supporting churches that I know of in India. This is their meeting house. It is the upper floor of where Samson and his father and mother live. And it will seat comfortably about 60 people. And it is open air, and you can see one of the, what we would call oddities, is that you see the women are over here and the men are over here. Now, there is no reason why they do that based upon the Bible. They just do that because that's their custom. The men and the women normally are seated separately. And you notice something else about these. The women, most all of the women are wearing saris, and many of them have their heads covered. Now, that doesn't mean that they are covering their heads because they think the scriptures require it. Again, this is a tradition among the Indian women. And one of the oddities here, at least from my perspective, is that most of the Indian women are attractively dressed. I mean, their saris are colorful. They're almost always well-groomed. The men are not. I wouldn't say they're slobs, but the men just don't. I don't think I started to say I don't think I've ever seen a man with a shirt and tie on. Maybe I did way long ago. But most of the men do not pay a lot of attention to their couture, but they have a keen interest in the Bible. And some of the best sessions that I have taught in the country of India has been with this church. I spent a week there, and we studied what is the church. And there were men who came from all over that area. They would sleep in this upper floor or on the roof in the evening. They laid on the concrete floor, by the way. There were no beds there. And I was downstairs. And even Samson and his wife were upstairs because they vacated their bedroom and gave it to me. And not only did they vacate their bedroom, they remodeled the bedroom and put an air conditioner in the bedroom. But the air conditioner did not work, unfortunately, which is not all that unusual. But I say this to simply observe that what we often take for granted is very, very unusual. I don't think that Samson would have ever considered putting an air conditioner in his house had not an American come there and stayed with him. And so I stayed there for about, I think, 3 to 3.5 days. And we had studies with the brethren there in the morning, afternoon, and then in the evening, we would go out to someone's home and have a study. Now, in the evening, often the studies would take place on the roof. Obviously, it's not a gable roof, it's a flat roof, concrete parapet around it so nobody will fall off. And they have big lights up there, and generally will have some big loud speakers, so their neighbors are going to hear it whether they want to or not. And obviously, when you have lots of light, you have lots of bugs. And so you have to not only fight the bugs, but you have to kind of find out, where am I on this text here? So it's a little bit more challenging than it would be in simply teaching a class here. Now we're going to civilization. We're going to start off in Rome and go up to the Czech Republic to right about here, and then back to Rome, and then back home. I don't know if you remember a man by the name of Marco di Martino. Marco came to the United States with his mother about 4.5 to 5 years ago. He was a young married man. His wife had a good job, so she could not make the trip. I met Marco at the Helton Drive Church building for a Thursday study, and we began corresponding with each other. And in the meantime, Marco has tried to start a congregation in the suburb of Rome where he lives. Well, Marco is really very good with graphics. He does a lot of advertising. But this past December, Marco's wife, who was pregnant, had a massive heart attack. She was 32 years old, and her brain was deprived of oxygen for approximately 10 minutes. She lost the baby, and she is in what euphemistically is called a vegetative state. She has no prognosis for recovery. And Marco obviously was crushed. He's a young married man. This was their first child. And what is Marco going to do? So I wrote Marco, since I had already planned to go to the Czech Republic, and asked him, Marco, would you like for me to spend a couple of days with you in Rome? He said, yes, please come. So I made arrangements to go. And I really went there for the purpose of trying to maybe encourage him or maybe get his mind off of his problems a little bit. And this is Marco and his mother Maria. This is the little place where they meet. They rent this place, and they've been in this particular building for several years. The church there is under 12 in number. So I go to Marco, and I'm amazed that Marco is the one who encourages me instead of my encouraging Marco. I could hardly imagine a young man, 32 to 34 years old, the prospect of his wife lingering in this state for who knows how long, plus the fact that his in-laws are not Christians, and they're Catholics, and because of their religion, that they would never approve of taking her off a life support system. And because of Italy's laws, they also have a legal right to tell what kind of treatment our daughter is going to receive. And so Marco is not only having to deal with the loss of his wife for all practical purposes, but also has to sort of tread a very delicate path with his in-laws in determining what kind of treatment his wife will receive. Well, it was really my pleasure to be with Marco. He is a remarkable young man, and he is being supported to teach, and he has not given up. In fact, he has sort of redoubled his efforts. And his mother is one who also stands beside him. This is in the Czech Republic. This is a town called Litomyšl. This is Sunday morning. This place is a rented place, and the people there do not speak English. Now, I'm staying with a couple that Leon knows. Marek Lutzik has 3 sons and a wife, and his sons, his 2 older sons, have been to Alabama to the leadership camp. And so I've known Marek for several years, and he invited me to come and stay with him, and we would study together for 3-4 days, which I did, and it was a pleasure to be in their home. Now again, they live maybe 35 minutes from where the church meets. They live in a very small village, a village which I think his family has grown up in, and they live in an old converted farmhouse, but that's really immaterial. This is a picture of some of the brethren. This, by the way, this couple are Seventh-day Adventists. And they have been meeting with this group for several months, which is rather an oddity. But they obviously are interested in the Bible, but they're not interested enough to change their practices yet. Now, in this part of the world, now Leon told me that, you stand out there and you greet everybody with a holy kiss. Well, in this part of the world, that is done literally. Now, there are one-cheekers and there are two-cheekers. The Czechs are the one-cheekers, but the people in Rome are two-cheekers. They kiss you on each cheek, and sometimes three-cheekers. They kiss you once, twice, and the third time. So they literally greet you with a holy kiss. Now, I'm not suggesting to you that that's what our practice should be. I do think we should greet each other. But it is interesting to see that in many cultures, they greet each other not with a handshake, which seems kind of masculine, but they greet each other with a kiss, which seems kind of feminine to me, but that's immaterial. Now, this is a family in České Budějovice. This is the Kubitschek family. The older daughter is not in the picture. She did not accompany us on this particular day. I've been going to České Budějovice since 2003. The small church that meets in the Kubitschek's house, which is probably is comprised of about 15 people. Years ago, they asked me, would you consider coming to CB and working with us for a couple of weeks, because we really need some older leadership. At that particular time, I was serving as an elder in Lilburn, Georgia. And so I said, well, I'll do my best to come. Well, I began in 2003 and have gone back at least once a year ever since then. The church in České Budějovice is really an unusual group. There are two men there. This is Jindra Kubitschek, and the vocals, which I do not have a picture of them, but Mira and Jindra do all of the teaching. They also have a monthly study, a monthly lecture, which is held in a public place, and they try to give a lecture on a subject that has broad interest. Now, I just wonder, in this group of people, if you decided to have a lecture in Huntsville, how many men would say, oh, I'll do that, no problem, month after month after month? Well, just imagine if there were only two of you. Only two men. Actually, there are three, but the third man does not speak. That is, he does not teach publicly. Just imagine if there are only two of you, and you've decided every month we're going to do that. Well, that's what they've decided. They've done that for years. And not only is that a practice in České Budějovice, but it's also the practice in other cities in the Czech Republic. But this young fella, this is Jindraček, that is little Jindra, and this is Eliška and Misha and Jindra. Their conversion is a very interesting story, and if you really want to get the lowdown, you probably could talk to Lonnie Oldag, because Lonnie is one of those men who is responsible for some of these brethren being Christians. Lonnie and his wife did a very good work in the early years of the last decade of the 21st century. And so you can see the product of the work which has been done. Now, one of the unusual things about the church in České Budějovice is they love to sing. And Jindra and Mira both are talented musicians, and they lead the singing. And if you've ever heard them sing, you would be amazed, because even though they are few in number, they probably can out-sing most any other group that I know of in the Czech Republic and some groups in the United States. Well, I'm going to leave here, and this past month in August, I made my, 25th or 26th trip to an island. This is Sri Lanka. This island used to be called Ceylon, and if you drink tea, then if you look on the carton where your tea bags come from, you might say this is #1 Ceylon tea. Well, years ago, when they became independent, they changed their name to Sri Lanka. But this country is composed of about 25 million people. The island is shaped like a teardrop, and it is basically flat, except for this area right through here. And this is where most all of the tea is grown. The airport is about here. And I'm going to go down this way up to a place called Badula, which is at about 2,500 feet elevation. Now, you may think, well, okay, that's not too bad. You have a nice car to go in. No, you generally go in a van. And the word van, what do you think of when you think of van? Do you think of a caravan, or do you think of a Toyota or something? Well, you've got the wrong picture. Because this van most of these vans look like they've been around for at least 25 years. If you look at the tires very closely, you might not want to go very far. Most of them have no air conditioning, and most all of them burn diesel, which means that when you accelerate, you're going to get a big plume of black smoke that comes out of the back end of that thing. 5 minutes. Okay, I'll make it. But anyway, it's going to take just about 6 hours to get from here over to here. Now, the young man that I say young man, he's not a young man now, he's almost middle age. The man that I'm going to be working with is named Nagendran. I've known him since he was a teenager. When he got married, I performed his wedding ceremony. Well, he now has 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. And he has been teaching the Bible for the last 12 to 15 years. His parents both worked on tea estates, which means that they're relatively poor people. And Nagendran has done a very good job. The first Sunday that I am in Badula, there are 5 baptisms. Now, this pool, and by the way, even though you cannot see it, there are fish in this pool. I tried to get a picture of the fish, but the reflection would not allow it. This pool is on a denominational church's property. We had to make arrangements prior to the immersion of these 5 people, and they allowed us to use their baptistry. Nobody has a baptistry among our brethren. You either use a creek, or you use a ditch, or you find someplace like this to immerse people. The 2 older sons of Nagendran have become Christians, and there are 2 women and 1 daughter who were immersed that morning. So that's really a good way to start off the trip, when there are 5 people who want to become Christians. I stay there about 4 days, and then on a Monday morning, we're going to start our studies in a place called Nuara Elia. Now, Nuara Elia is about 3 hours away, and it is at about 6,000 feet in elevation. It is in the heart of the tea country, and we have determined that this is about the best place for us to meet to have our studies with preachers. I've been studying with them for almost 15 years in Nuara Elia, and we finally finished the book of Acts. These are some of the men, and I've known this man for almost forever. And there are 2 Church of God preachers in this audience. This man is named Eric. He is from way down south, so he has a long way to go. This is his son. And all of these men speak different languages. There are 2 different languages. There are 3 different languages represented in this group. I'm English speaking. Nagendran speaks Tamil, but Eric speaks Sinhalese, which is the official language of Sri Lanka. And so oftentimes you have to have 2 different interpreters interpret from English into Tamil and then from English into Sinhalese. Fortunately, Eric understands enough English that we had to have it interpreted only 2 times. After Nuara Elia, oh, and by the way, sometimes traffic is really slow because elephants don't move very fast. Can you imagine seeing this in America? There are 2 elephants on the back of this truck, and the line of cars behind them trying to get around them, I didn't even see how far back the line went. But from there, and by the way, Sri Lanka would be over here. I'm going to fly up to Turkey, and then to Johannesburg, and then to a little island called Mauritius. This used to be part of the Seychelles, but they became independent a number of years ago. And we're going to be meeting with a man and his wife. This is Marianne and Silvio. They are French speakers. It is a French-speaking island, but most of the Christians understand English, and so we don't have to have everything translated. But I'm going to be staying in their house. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but I had picked up an infection in Sri Lanka, and I have 2 very bad sores on my feet on the top and 2 sores on the bottom of my feet, so it made walking very difficult. Fortunately, I was staying in their house. And the church meets on the top floor of their house. This is where the church meets. And Silvio has done all of this work on his own. He's paid for all of it. He does not charge the church anything. He pays for the electricity. They meet in this room upstairs. And there are about 35 Christians who meet in this place on Sunday. These, as far as I know, are the only Christians on the island. The place where we're meeting is St. Joseph. That doesn't sound right. But it is a port, Port Joseph. It is a port on the eastern side of the island. And this is the only, as far as I know, there are many, many other places that churches could be started, but this is the only place where I know a church meets on the entire island. Just imagine if this were the only church in the state of Alabama. You would have about the same idea that you have here. Well, this is Brother David. Actually, they call him David. He is 97 years old. And this man, when he comes to church on Sunday, he has a tie on, he has a coat on, and he is the first one there. Just imagine. That's a great heritage, isn't it? Well, that's all. Thank you very much for your attention today.